Hello everybody, it's Jo back with another raw video on Black-Gold Alchemy, and today going fully back into astrology. I thought I'd go back to the general subject of astrology and talk about aspects in the natal charts and transiting aspects, or indeed aspects in any chart that we're looking at really. For you, those of you who have a reasonable understanding of astrology, you probably know what aspects are, but if you don't, or you're not completely sure, hopefully this video will be of help. I've had to come indoors, it's a little bit too hot and a little bit too noisy outside, so let's do this indoors today. And so aspects are basically mathematical angles and are usually divided into two groups, two categories: major aspects and minor aspects. And the major aspects are considered to be stronger than the minor aspects, naturally. And basically in your birth chart, for example, you will have certain planets or angles or planetary bodies or points within that birth chart that create certain angles to other planets, points, etc. And obviously the conjunct aspect is one where the two planets are actually in the same part of the chart. They don't necessarily have to be at the same degree. We allow a deviance as astrologers, and that can depend on the astrologer who's actually doing the reading. For example, I like to keep the deviance quite low, so I work normally with up to 6 degrees for major aspects in difference. So you could have, for example, the moon at 1 degree Scorpio and say Neptune at 5 degrees Scorpio, which would be 4 degrees apart. So that would count as a conjunction, even though they're not exactly at the same degree. And what aspects do is they give us a deeper insight into the chart, because when we look at interpreting where a planet lies in your chart, for example, what zodiac sign and what house in the chart it falls in, that to an extent is something of generalization, obviously. So the aspects for me personally give a much deeper insight into the connections between planets and how they play out, and it does take into account which signs and houses they're in too in the interpretation. The other major aspects are the opposition, which is where a planet is in 180 degrees opposition in the chart to another point or planet. And again, there can be a deviance. Again, I work with up to 6. Some astrologers will work with up to 8 degree deviance, even sometimes 10 with the sun in particular. But I like to keep it fairly tight, because I think the wider the deviance, then the less likely the interpretation is to actually apply to the person and their life. Then we also have a square, which is any planet 90 degrees away from another one. The opposition and the square are considered to be hard aspects. So the opposition is usually an energy that needs flipping. So we have two planets that have a kind of an opposing energy between them, and so this needs to be worked through and dissolved ideally. And actually the oppositions are not too tricky, even though they are a hard aspect. They can show us where we have a disparity between two energies, and also how we can perhaps work with them and flip them to resolve this. The squares are generally thought to be much more challenging. Some astrologers even think that it's a lifetime's work, or maybe can never really be brought into harmony. I'm not sure I entirely believe that, but certainly squares tend to crop up fairly regularly between planets and do require a lot more attention. They can bring a lot of challenges with them, so they're always worth paying extra attention to in the chart. Then we have the soft aspects from the major aspects, and they are the trine, which is anything 120 degrees apart, and the sextile, which is 60 degrees apart. Now the trine is a nice easy flowing energy between two planets, and it can also bring an element of complacency with it. We kind of tend to take it for granted, really, the connection between the two planets. So it is still worth paying attention to. The sextile is a harmonious one as well. It's the 60-degree apart angle, and this one is harmonious, but it still requires a little bit of attention, a bit of effort on our parts. So those are generally considered the major aspects. The conjunct, where two planets connect or are very close to each other, can kind of go either way depending on what the planets represent and where they fall in your chart, and also their connections to other planets in aspect. So they can kind of go either way, but the two planets will ignite each other's energy generally. And then we have minor aspects. Now with the minor aspects, we generally work with a much smaller deviance, also known as an orb. So most of the time we would keep that under 3-degree difference. If you work with asteroids, which I do a lot, I would work with a maximum deviance of 2 degrees for asteroids, because they are less potent generally than a planet. So we have many minor aspects, and I'm not going to touch on all of them today because it gets too confusing. But I'll just bring up 3 or 4. One is the semi-square. So this is where two planetary bodies or points are 45 degrees apart, they're half of the square. So again, this can be tricky, but often not quite as difficult to handle as the square itself. However, there is perhaps more of an immature, on a soul level, energy between the two planets that we'll need working with and making adjustments for. The semi-sextile, which is 30-degree difference between two planets, half of the sextile, is considered, well, it's considered a growth aspect. So while it's not a challenging one necessarily, it can show us where the two planets have a compatibility, but also a lesson within that compatibility that we can learn from. Another one is the inconjunct, which is different from the conjunct, and this is where planets are 150 degrees apart. It's also known as the quincunx, and if you think of two planets that are in conjunct or quincunx, they tend to have a blind spot towards each other, so they don't really see each other, they don't interact. It's a little bit like the Venn diagram, where there's just two circles and no overlap. Now these are not negative, these are not necessarily positive, they are more neutral aspects, and they do require a lot of adjustment, though it's good to be aware of them. It can create some quite positive qualities between the two planets, but we need to kind of address them really, because and we need to adjust, because we're losing out potentially on the potential that in fact those two planets can have working together. And the other one two more actually that I wanted to talk about were the novile, which is a 40-degree deviance. It's not quite so commonly known, so it's where we're dividing the 360-degree wheel by 9 into 40-degree chunks. And when two planets are novile with each other, it tends to create a sort of joyous energy between the two planets, so where we can really appreciate the qualities of both planets in harmony and how they work together. So that's quite a nice one. And then we have the quintile and the biquintile. So the quintile is a 72-degree deviance with a maximum 72-degree aspect, with an orb deviance of a maximum of, I would use no more than 2 degrees. And then the biquintile is 144. And both of these have a similar connection between the two planets involved, and that is one of a special connection, a magical connection, and one where we have the potential to perceive things in a different way than the average person, in terms of the energies of those two planets and where they lie in the chart. The quintiles tend to be more on a personal level in your own life. The biquintiles are more potential for the wider collective energies and what you do in relation to the world and other people and your community. So those are some of the minor aspects. Some astrologers don't pay a huge amount of attention to the minor aspects, and there are many, many more, but we won't go into all of them today. So hopefully that gives you a little idea. When you look at most computer software that generate natal charts, you'll find the hard aspects are usually in red. They're red lines that go between the planets, and blue for the harmonious. The quincunx is normally a green line, and the quintile and biquintile are usually golden. It doesn't apply to every computer software, but the majority of them tend to use that colour format so that you can instantly see the lines. And then on top of that, what we do is we have configurations that have been identified, which are shapes. So sometimes you'll see a very obvious shape in a chart, for example, an equilateral triangle. Now that's normally made up of 3 trines. So you'll basically have 3 planets, all roughly 120 degrees apart in the chart, and that creates a blue triangle. Could be in any shape around the chart, but it's always an equilateral triangle, and that shows where there is a flow between all 3 planets. That's quite easy, and that's known as a grand trine. It's normally a very positive thing in the chart, but again the complacency can set in, so we have to watch for that. And then when you have that shape and you have 2 sextiles coming off one side of that triangle, it's known as a kite, and has another extra magical quality on top of the trine. On the more negative side of the hard aspects, we have the T-square, for example, where you have 2 planets in opposition, 180 degrees apart, and then 2 squares coming off onto another planet, 2 90-degree lines that form another triangle, but not equilateral. And the T-square can be quite a challenge because the planet that is at the apex of the point of the triangle is often struggling because it's creating 2 squares coming off it, and it really needs us, I believe, first to resolve and dissolve the opposition between the 2 planets, and in doing so we then help to ease the squares between those 2 opposing planets and the one at the apex. And there are many, many, many different configurations that have names. These are always interesting things for astrologers to look at in a chart. And again, they can be a bit more challenging, or they can be positive in our chart and help us to get through life. But aspects, as I say, are very, very much concerned with showing us the deeper levels in our charts. And as well as the natal chart, of course, we also have the planets currently moving in the sky, which are also creating these same aspects from where they are in the sky in the current moment to our natal chart or our progress chart or our composite chart. Whatever chart we happen to be studying, we'll have the current positions of the planets also making these angles, these lines, these aspects between the planets. So we look at those when we're looking at current energies and predicting the energies ahead for a client. And some are longer lasting, where the planets are moving very slowly, obviously, because they stay in that aspect for sometimes months and months and months. And then we have more fleeting aspects, like the moon moves very quickly. Once it goes around the whole chart once a month, so it's moving very fast, and also therefore the aspects it's creating along the way usually don't last for more than a day, half a day. But these are all very interesting when we're looking at our daily forecasts, and of course the forecast ahead for a year, 6 months, whatever we're looking at ahead. So yeah, aspects do play a massive part in astrology, and it's not obviously all about where our sun lies and our moon in the chart, although of course they do give us a broader view and are in fact important and key parts of doing an astrology reading. So I hope if you're not so familiar with aspects, that's hopefully explain them a little bit today. It would have probably been easier to have a whiteboard, but I don't own a whiteboard, so if you have any questions, of course, please do drop them in, or if you'd like to know more, or perhaps some more of the minor aspects, then yeah, please, always willing to help. And also, if you are interested in learning more about astrology, I do offer one-to-one lessons in person or online for very reasonable rates. And that also comes with a training document after you've had your first lesson for free. So yeah, please let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in lessons. Anyway, wishing you a beautiful rest of your Sunday and a lovely week ahead. We've got the Lions Gate coming up on the 8th, so very close, 2 days away now. Is it 2 days? Yes, 2 days. Very easy to lose track of what date it is. So yeah, that's coming up this week, and that's going to be an interesting one, I think. There seems to be, as well as being in the Leo season, which is of course a fire sign, there seems to be a lot of fiery energy around now. So if you're feeling some anger and some fiery energy coming up, this is quite normal around this time, but it's particularly exacerbated by different energies and different aspects in the collective chart, etc. So this is normal and it will pass, and I feel like later in the month, around the time actually that the sun moves into Virgo, around the 23rd, is the time when we're just going to be feeling things just calming down a little more, because it's been a very intense and fiery last 2 to 3 months, as we all know, and it's been tough, and we do need that downtime. But I think that downtime is coming now, soon, in the next few weeks, and also will continue through to January, where we actually have many of the planets in retrograde for the remainder of the year. So that can also be a good time for reflection, but things just calming down, slowing down a little bit. It doesn't mean they've completely slowed down or gone away, but what it does usually mean is things on the surface seem calmer, and it gives us a chance to just reflect on what's been going on in the more intense times, as in the last few months that we've had. So yeah, wishing you a wonderful Lions Gate as well, and see you soon with another video. Thank you for watching.